The Abernathy Collection. Back in 2011, I was 17, and my world was pretty small. It revolved around my best friend, Sam, avoiding homework, and trying to get my dad's beat-up sedan to start on cold mornings. We lived in a quiet suburb in Ohio, the kind of place with identical houses and perfectly manicured lawns. All except for one, Mr. Abernathy's house. Abernathy was the monster at the end of our block. A bitter old man who'd scream at you if your ball so much as rolled onto his precious grass. Sam and I had a long history of avoiding him, but one afternoon, that changed. Sam's younger sister accidentally kicked her soccer ball into his yard, and it knocked over a hideous, pointy-hatted lawn gnome. Abernathy came out of his house like a storm, face purple with rage. He didn't just yell. He called Sam's parents, inventing a whole story about how Sam had done it deliberately, calling him a delinquent. The result? Sam was grounded for 2 full weeks, including Halloween weekend, the one thing we looked forward to all year. His parents, not wanting trouble with the crazy old man, just told Sam to take the punishment and forget about it. But Sam didn't forget. He wanted revenge, and he said he had a plan. Sam's idea was simple but brilliant. He told me revenge was a dish best served cold. If we just egged Abernathy's house, he'd know it was us instantly. But if we waited for the one night of the year when chaos was expected, no one would ever suspect. In our part of Ohio, the night before Halloween wasn't just for mischief. We called it Devil's Night, a night when teenagers performed acts of vandalism, an unofficial tradition. It was the perfect cover, but simple vandalism wasn't enough for Sam. He wanted to hit Abernathy where it really hurt. Not his house, not his gnomes, but his sanctuary, the large, windowless workshop he built in his backyard. No one was ever allowed in there. It was his pride and joy. We were going to break in and wreck it from the inside out. The plan took shape over the next few weeks. The main problem was getting Abernathy out of the house long enough for us to do the deed. That's where my older sister, Chloe, came in. For the price of a month's worth of chores, she agreed to help. On Devil's Night, she would call Abernathy, pretending to be from a neighborhood watch alert system, and report a group of teens vandalizing cars a few blocks away. We knew his territorial rage would be too much for him to ignore. He'd leave to investigate, giving us the window we needed. The night of October 30th arrived, buzzing with a cold, electric energy. I was nervous, my hands slick with sweat, but Sam was calm, his eyes fixed with a kind of grim determination. We hid in the bushes across the street, watching, waiting. At exactly 9 p.m., my phone vibrated. A text from Chloe, "Done." A minute later, Abernathy's front door burst open. He stormed to his car and peeled out of his driveway, heading in the direction of the fake vandalism report. It had worked perfectly. We had maybe 20 minutes, tops. We darted across the street, hearts pounding in our chests, and slipped into his backyard. The lock on the workshop door was old and flimsy. A crowbar popped it open with a sickening crunch. We stepped inside, flicking on a small flashlight. The place was obsessively organized, tools hanging on the walls in perfect alignment. But something was off. It was too clean, too sterile. "Let's just smash his stupid tools and go," I whispered. But Sam was scanning the room, his eyes narrowed. He wasn't satisfied. "There has to be something else," he muttered, running his hand along the walls. That's when he stopped at the floor. He knelt down and knocked on a section of wooden planks. It echoed hollowly. Beneath a workbench, we found it, a loose floorboard. Prying it up, we found a small, hidden compartment. Inside wasn't tools or money. It was a small, worn leather box. We opened it. My breath caught in my throat. Inside were at least a dozen driver's licenses and wallets. Men and women, all different ages. I recognized a face from a missing person poster I'd seen at the gas station a month ago. Tucked underneath them was a small, black digital camera. My hands shaking, I turned it on. The first picture made me want to throw up. It was the man from the missing poster, his eyes wide with terror, tied to a chair in what looked like a dark, unfinished cellar. I clicked through the photos. Each one was a different person from the IDs, all in the same state of capture and fear. This wasn't a workshop. It was a trophy room, Our stupid prank had stumbled into a serial killer's lair. We didn't need to say a word. We scrambled out of that workshop, leaving everything as we'd found it, and ran. We didn't stop until we were miles away, gasping for air behind a 24-hour diner. From a payphone, Sam made the call. He disguised his voice, reported suspicious activity at Abernathy's address, and hung up. We circled back an hour later, expecting to see the street flooded with police cars, helicopters, anything. Instead, we saw a single patrol car cruise slowly down the block, its spotlight sweeping across the houses, before it continued on its way and disappeared. The cops had dismissed the call. Just another Devil's Night prank. We realized with a sinking, ice-cold horror that we hadn't exposed a killer. We had warned him. The next morning, a moving truck was parked in Abernathy's driveway. By noon, he was gone. He just vanished. The police never came back. No one ever connected the disappearances to the quiet old man at the end of our street. He got away with it, and it was our fault. We tried to get revenge for a broken gnome, and in doing so, we gave a monster the head start he needed to disappear forever. That secret is a ghost that has haunted Sam and me every single day since. The Good Samaritan of Blackwood Road. College was supposed to be about freedom, but for me, that meant being broke. That's why, after a Halloween party my freshman year, I was driving my sputtering 1998 Toyota Corolla instead of crashing on a friend's couch. The party was in a rural town about an hour from my campus, and the only way back was a 2-lane stretch of asphalt called Blackwood Road. It was the kind of road that felt like it swallowed light. Tall, skeletal trees crowded the edges, their branches clawing at the night sky. At 1:30 in the morning, my car decided it had had enough. With a series of violent coughs, the engine died. I coasted to the shoulder, the sudden silence deafening. Of course, there was no cell service. I was wearing a cheap scarecrow costume from the party, a plaid shirt, some straw tucked into my jeans, and smudged face paint. I felt ridiculous and completely, utterly stranded. After about 20 minutes of seeing nothing but darkness, a pair of headlights cut through the gloom. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck, and it slowed to a stop beside me. The man behind the wheel looked like he was carved from the local oak trees. Weathered face, kind eyes. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He introduced himself as Silas and offered to tow my car back to his farm, just a couple of miles up the road. He said the cell towers were useless out here, but I could use his landline to call for a proper tow in the morning. Relief washed over me so intensely I could have hugged him. I agreed without a second thought. As we drove, his old truck smelling of earth and motor oil, he made small talk. He asked about my costume. "A scarecrow, huh?" he said, a strange smile touching his lips. "Fitting for a night like tonight. It's an important night for the harvest. The night the veil is thin." I just nodded, figuring he was one of those old-timers with folksy sayings. But the way he said it, it felt weighted. He turned off Blackwood Road onto an even smaller, unpaved dirt track that plunged deeper into the forest. "My place is just back here," he said, nice and quiet. The word quiet suddenly felt sinister. His farm wasn't what I expected. It was a dark, sprawling property with a weathered farmhouse and a massive, ominous-looking barn, all of it seeming to hunch under the moonlight. He parked the truck and told me to follow him to the barn. He'd get some chains to secure my car properly for the night. The moment I stepped inside that barn, a primal alarm bell went off in my head. The air was thick with the smell of hay and something else, something metallic and old. Silas slid the huge barn door shut behind us, the sound echoing with a horrifying finality. He turned to me, and the kindness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a zealous, unnerving light. "Every year, the spirits of the field get restless on this night," he said, his voice no longer gentle. "They walk the roads, looking for a way back. They must be returned to the soil to ensure the next harvest is a good one." From the shadows behind a stack of hay bales, 3 other figures emerged. 2 men built like Silas, and a teenage girl with wide, terrified eyes. I stumbled back, realizing my stupid scarecrow costume had been a terrible mistake. He didn't see a college kid. He saw a sign. An omen. We thank you for your sacrifice," Silas said, as if it were a prayer. They lunged for me. I was a kid. They were strong countrymen. The fight was over before it began. They dragged me to the center of the barn, where a huge, cross-shaped wooden post stood waiting. With rough, practiced hands, they began tying my wrists and ankles to it. This was a ritual. They were going to make me a real scarecrow. I was screaming, begging, telling them it was just a costume. But they didn't listen. As the men tightened the ropes, the teenage girl, who Silas called Alara, just watched, her face pale. She caught my eye, and in her gaze, I saw a flicker of doubt. While the men turned their backs to grab something from a dark corner, Alara moved. She stumbled, knocking over a large kerosene lantern. It shattered on the floor, and flames immediately began to lick up the dry hay. Chaos erupted. In the confusion, as the men yelled and rushed to stomp out the fire, she darted past me and hissed, "Run!" I felt a sharp tug at my wrist. She'd cut one of the ropes with a small knife. It was all I needed. I tore my other hand free, broke from the post, and sprinted for the barn door. I didn't look back. I ran through the dark woods, branches whipping at my face, the glow of the fire behind me. I eventually found my way back to Blackwood Road and flagged down the first car I saw. The police took my report, and 2 officers drove out to the farm. But it was useless. When they got there, the fire was out. The family was calm, apologetic. They told the police I was a drunk college kid who showed up at their property after a Halloween party, got spooked by their barn, and ran off. It was my word against a whole family's. There were no ropes, no post, nothing out of the ordinary. There were no charges filed. There was no proof. I dropped out of that college the next semester and moved back home. I'm still haunted by what happened. I know that family is still out there, on that dark farm, living by their own twisted, ancient rules. And I know that every Halloween, when the veil is thin, they're watching the roads, waiting for another spirit of the field to get stranded. The carver of Blackwood Sanatorium. My grandfather, Arthur, was a man of quiet habits and even quieter fears. He was a retired groundskeeper, and his hands were permanently stained with the memory of soil. But there was one thing about him I never understood: his absolute hatred of Halloween. While other old men in our New England town handed out candy, he'd lock the doors and draw the curtains, sitting in the dark until the night was over. He especially never went near the abandoned Blackwood Sanatorium that sat crumbling on the edge of town. One autumn, when I was old enough, I finally asked him why. He looked at me with tired, haunted eyes and decided it was time to tell me the story. Back in 1958, he told me, he was a young man working as an orderly at Blackwood, which was then a fully operational asylum for the mentally ill. It was a grim place, filled with the low hum of human misery. That October, they admitted a new patient, an artist named Julian, committed by his family for what the doctors called manic delusions. Julian was calm, but unnervingly intense. He claimed he could see the lingering sorrows of the asylum, the spirits of those who had died within its walls, and that he could give them a face. Deemed harmless, his psychiatrist approved a request for art therapy. Julian didn't want paint or clay. He asked for a block of wood from an old, lightning-scarred oak tree that had fallen on the grounds, and a simple, blunt carving tool. The doctors thought it was a healthy outlet. So, for weeks, Julian sat in his room, day and night, methodically carving. He said he was making a mask for each of the lost souls he saw. As October wore on and the air grew colder, a strange tension began to grip the sanatorium. The patients grew more agitated, their night terrors more vivid. Nurses would whisper about seeing fleeting shadows in the corridors and hearing faint cries from empty rooms. The closer it got to Halloween, the worse it became. All the while, Julian just sat in his room and carved. Whenever an orderly checked on him, he'd have a new, impossibly detailed wooden mask finished. Each one was a portrait of pure, silent agony. On the afternoon of October 31st, Julian called an orderly to his room. He held up his final creation, a 7th, horrifying mask. "They're all here now," he whispered, his eyes gleaming. "They're ready for the masquerade." That night, an oppressive silence fell over Blackwood. Then, At the stroke of midnight, every light in the sanatorium went out at once, plunging the entire building into absolute darkness. What followed was a symphony of terror. Screams echoed from every ward. Staff and patients alike babbled about the same thing. Figures made of shadow, darting through the hallways, their faces covered by the exact wooden masks Julian had carved. They never touched anyone, but their silent, sorrowful presence was a psychological torment. The staff, including my grandfather, barricaded themselves in the nurses' station, listening to the muffled sounds of weeping and panicked shrieks until dawn. It was a night of pure, undiluted madness. When the first rays of morning light broke, the emergency power finally flickered on. The asylum was in disarray, but no one was physically harmed, just left shattered and traumatized. The staff began a frantic headcount. Every single patient was accounted for, except for one. They rushed to Julian's room and found the door locked from the inside. After breaking it down, they were met with an impossible scene. The room was empty. All of the masks Julian had spent a month carving were gone. And on the small table in the center of the room sat the block of wood from the old oak tree, completely whole, smooth, and untouched, as if it had never been carved at all. The official report said Julian had staged the event, picked his lock, and escaped during the chaos of the power failure. But my grandfather knew better. Julian hadn't escaped the asylum. He, and the 7 sorrows he'd given a face to, had simply vanished from it. Arthur quit his job that week, and to this day, he believes that on Halloween night, Julian didn't break out of his prison. He carved a door, the ritual of silence. For 5 years, I worked as a counselor at a seasonal sleepaway camp called Camp Hollow Oak. My favorite session was always the last one. A week-long, Halloween-themed camp that ended on October 31st. We'd tell ghost stories, carve pumpkins, and go on spooky night hikes. I loved seeing the kids conquer their fears and find joy in the macabre. I believed that stories, even scary ones, were a gift. I don't believe that anymore. Not after what happened to Leo. Leo was a shy, quiet 10-year-old. For the first few days of camp, he barely spoke a word. He'd just sit and draw in a sketchbook. I was worried he wasn't fitting in. That changed during our first campfire storytelling night. I told the campers the local legend of the Whisper Man, a creature said to live in the deep woods, a spirit that could perfectly mimic any sound it heard to lure you away from the path. Most kids were spooked, but Leo was mesmerized. For the rest of the week, it was all he could talk about. He came out of his shell completely, his sketchbook filled with incredible, eerie drawings of the Whisper Man. In arts and crafts, he made himself a mask out of bark and fallen leaves. He'd wear it and creep around the woods, not to scare the other kids, but as a game. He was the guardian Whisper Man, protecting the camp. It was creative, imaginative, and beautiful to watch. He was finally happy. On Halloween morning, the parents came to pick up their kids. Leo's legal guardians were his grandparents, a stern, older couple from a very rural, isolated part of the state. When they saw Leo's mask and heard him excitedly telling them about the Whisper Man, their faces hardened. I tried to explain that it was just a fun camp legend, but they looked at me with cold, distrustful eyes. They took Leo's drawings, packed his bag, and left without another word. I felt a knot of unease in my stomach, but I dismissed it as them just being overprotective. A week later, I got a phone call from the camp director. Leo's school had called him. Leo hadn't shown up all week. The director asked me if anything seemed strange when his grandparents picked him up. My voice trembled as I recounted their cold, hostile reaction to the Whisper Man story. That was enough to trigger a welfare check. A local sheriff drove out to their remote property. The grandparents were hesitant, but finally let him inside. The house was clean, quiet, and stark. The sheriff asked to see Leo. They led him to a small, windowless bedroom at the back of the house. The door was bolted from the outside. Inside, Leo was lying on a small bed, pale and eerily still. The room was bare, except for an empty water glass. In the fireplace in the main room, the sheriff found the charred remains of Leo's sketchbook. Under questioning, the grandparents explained what they had done. Their voices filled not with malice, but with a terrifying, righteous certainty. In their deeply ingrained folklore, you never speak the name of a dark spirit, and you certainly never pretend to be one. To them, Leo's mask and his stories weren't a game. It was an invitation. They believed the Whisperman had followed their grandson home from camp and latched onto his soul. They were told by their community's elders that the only way to drive the spirit out was with a ritual of silence. They had locked him in that room, not to starve his body, but to starve the spirit of sound, attention, and stimulus. They believed that if the host vessel was silent and empty enough, the entity would be forced to leave. They weren't punishing their grandson. In their minds, they were performing a desperate, holy exorcism. Leo was taken into protective services. I was called in to give a statement, and I broke down completely. My fun, harmless campfire story had become the catalyst for a little boy's nightmare. I was trying to spark his imagination, and instead, I gave his guardians a reason to try and extinguish his soul. I never found out what happened to Leo, or if he ever recovered. All I know is that I took a happy kid who loved monsters and handed him over to people who believed in them a little too much. I don't tell ghost stories anymore. I learned the hard way that the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in the people we're supposed to trust.
And so, our campfire dies down. For now. Thank you for joining me in the shadows tonight. If you felt a shiver down your spine, leave a like, so we know you survived the experience. To ensure you never miss a future narration, and to be alerted when the darkness calls again, click the notification bell.